February 1943. The Norwegian coast. Frozen darkness stretches across the Hardangervidda Plateau. A six-man British commando team moves through knee-deep snow toward the Vemork hydroelectric plant. Hitler's heavy water facility. The Nazi pathway to an atomic bomb. One wrong step, one visible track, one alert German patrol, and the mission dies before it begins. The lead commando glances down at his boots. They look wrong, distorted. The soles are grotesquely oversized, bulging outward like something from a fever dream. He's wearing rubber overshoes designed to make his footprints vanish, not shrink, not disguise, vanish. Because these aren't normal boot covers, they're engineered deception. Footwear that leaves prints so bizarre, so utterly unlike human tracks that German trackers following them will assume they're following wildlife, reindeer, Arctic foxes, anything but British saboteurs. The team crosses an open snowfield. Behind them, the tracks look like wandering animal trails, uneven, scattered, purposeless. German sentries patrol this route every 4 hours. They'll see the tracks, they'll examine them, they'll dismiss them as nature and walk on. The commandos will be inside the plant placing explosives, while Nazi guards follow fake reindeer prints in circles. This is the weirdest piece of equipment the British ever issued. Rubber overshoes with animal feet molded into the soles. Boots designed to lie with every step. And they worked so perfectly that German intelligence never figured out how Allied commandos moved through occupied territory without leaving human tracks. How did Britain turn footwear into one of the most deceptive World War II weapons ever deployed? How did fake animal feet sabotage Hitler's atomic program? By 1940, Britain faced a brutal tactical problem. Commandos and special operations executive agents needed to operate in snow-covered territories. Norway, the Arctic, mountainous regions of occupied Europe. But snow was the perfect witness. Every footprint told a story. Direction, speed, number of men, time elapsed. A trained German tracker could read a snow trail like a book and follow it straight back to a sabotage team's position. Traditional countermeasures failed miserably. Brushing out tracks with branches took hours and left obvious disturbance patterns. Walking backward in your own footprints only worked for short distances before you stumbled or lost your way. Wrapping cloth around boots created distinctive drag marks that screamed concealment attempt to any competent observer. And simply avoiding snow wasn't an option. Some of the war's most critical targets sat deep in snow-locked terrain. The problem was particularly acute in Norway. After Germany's 1940 invasion, Norwegian resistance fighters and British commandos conducted constant raids, sabotaging supply lines, destroying infrastructure, gathering intelligence. But the Norwegian wilderness was unforgiving. Endless snow, limited tree cover, visibility for kilometers. One careless crossing of an open field could leave tracks visible for days. German mountain troops were expert trackers, many recruited from Bavarian Alpine units with decades of winter warfare experience. They could distinguish between a Norwegian civilian's worn boots and a British commando's military-issue footwear at a glance. Churchill's directive was clear. British forces had to become invisible in occupied territory, not just hard to find, invisible. Special Operations executive engineers began experimenting with solutions. They tried everything: rubber pads that smoothed footprints, inflatable snowshoes that distributed weight, even spring-loaded boots that allowed men to leap several meters between steps to create impossible track patterns. Most failed spectacularly or proved impractical under field conditions. Then someone asked a radical question. What if we don't hide the tracks? What if we transform them? What if British commandos left footprints that looked exactly like the wildlife Germans expected to see in Norwegian mountains? What if every step told a lie so convincing that German trackers would see the evidence of infiltration and dismiss it as nature? The answer was the footprint overshoe, a rubber cover that fit over military boots and transformed human tracks into animal prints. Reindeer hooves, large bird talons, even bear paws for certain terrain. It sounds absurd, comical even, but it worked with such devastating effectiveness that German after-action reports are filled with bewildered complaints about British forces who seemed to materialize out of nowhere, strike targets, and vanish without leaving human traces. This is the story of the weirdest piece of equipment Britain ever issued, the rubber overshoes that turned commandos into ghosts. The footwear that lied so perfectly it helped sabotage Nazi Germany's atomic ambitions and turned the Norwegian wilderness into a graveyard for German patrols. You won't believe how something this strange became this deadly. The engineering requirements were unprecedented. The overshoes had to create convincing animal tracks under scrutiny from expert German trackers. They had to be durable enough to survive kilometers of rough terrain. They had to fit over standard military boots without compromising mobility. And they had to be lightweight enough that commandos could carry them on long-range missions without exhaustion. The SOE's equipment section had 6 months to deliver a working prototype. They started by studying actual animal tracks. Biologists provided detailed measurements of reindeer hooves, the split-toe structure, the dew claw impressions behind the main hoof, the slight asymmetry that occurred during walking. Norwegian resistance contacts sent photographs of tracks in different snow conditions: powdery fresh snow, packed trails, icy crust. The engineers realized that perfect symmetry would look artificial. Real animals shifted weight, placed feet at varying angles, left deeper impressions when climbing slopes. The overshoes had to replicate these subtle variations or fail immediately under expert examination. The primary design was the reindeer hoof pattern. Reindeer were everywhere in Norwegian mountains, wild herds numbering in the thousands. German soldiers saw reindeer tracks daily and thought nothing of them. The overshoe sole was molded from thick rubber compound reinforced with canvas layers. The hoof shape protruded downward in a split-toe configuration, 2 rounded points separated by a V-shaped gap. Behind the main hoof, smaller dew claw impressions were carved into the rubber. When the wearer stepped down, the flexible rubber compressed differently depending on weight distribution, creating natural variation in track depth. But here's the brilliant part. The overshoes were intentionally oversized. A human boot is roughly 28 centimeters long. The reindeer overshoe measured 35 centimeters. This mismatch meant the wearer's foot sat inside a larger cavity and the track pattern extended well beyond the actual boot outline. The result? Footprints that looked proportionately correct for a 200-kilogram reindeer, not a 75-kilogram human. German trackers measuring the prints would calculate animal size based on hoof dimensions and conclude they were tracking wildlife, not saboteurs. The attachment system was critical. Early prototypes used leather straps that froze solid in extreme cold and took minutes to remove, useless for rapid movement. The final design employed elastic cords that hooked onto boot eyelets and stretched around the heel. You could don the overshoes in under 10 seconds, even wearing gloves. Removal was equally fast, critical if commandos needed to transition from snowy terrain to bare rock, where the overshoes would leave no impression and just added weight. Secondary designs included large bird talons for certain environments. These looked bizarre: 3 forward claws and 1 rear talon, each carved into the rubber sole at angles that mimicked predatory birds like eagles or large hawks. The use case was specific: rocky terrain with patches of snow where reindeer wouldn't naturally travel, but large birds might land. Commandos wearing these would leave tracks suggesting a heavy bird had walked across the snow between rock outcroppings. The Germans would assume scavengers searching for carrion and ignore the trail. The most audacious design was the bear paw overshoe. This was massive, 45 centimeters long, with individual toe impressions and claw marks. It was used rarely, primarily in dense forests where brown bears were known to roam. The psychological impact was significant. German patrols encountering bear paw tracks would often retreat rather than follow them, fearing an encounter with a 300-kilogram predator. British commandos exploited this, using bear paw overshoes to mark perimeters around hiding areas, effectively creating psychological barriers that Germans avoided without realizing they'd been manipulated. Manufacturing was done in small batches at a secret facility in Scotland. The rubber compounds had to remain flexible in temperatures down to -30 degrees Celsius. Too soft, and they'd wear out in kilometers. Too hard, and they'd crack in extreme cold. The engineers settled on a blend of natural rubber with synthetic additives that maintained elasticity across temperature ranges. Each overshoe was hand-finished, with workers using files and knives to add asymmetries and wear patterns that made the molds look less uniform. No two pairs were identical. Testing was exhaustive. Commandos practiced walking with overshoes on Scottish moors under observation by gamekeepers and hunters, men who tracked deer professionally. The testers examined the tracks and had to determine if they were real animal prints or fakes. Initial designs fooled about 60% of observers. After refinements, adding subtle irregularities, adjusting hoof angles, incorporating realistic stride patterns, the success rate jumped to 85%. That was good enough. Under field conditions, with German trackers examining prints quickly while exposed to hostile fire, the overshoes would be essentially undetectable. But walking naturally in overshoes required training. The oversized soles changed your gait. You couldn't run effectively. The overshoes would slip or catch on terrain. You had to walk deliberately, placing each foot carefully to prevent the rubber from twisting and creating unnatural drag marks. Commandos practiced for hours, learning to mimic animal movement patterns. Reindeer don't walk in straight lines. They meander, pause to graze, circle back. Commandos had to do the same, creating tracks that told a believable story of animal behavior. The overshoes also incorporated clever misdirection features. Some versions had multiple sole options. Flip the overshoe over, and the underside had a different animal print. This allowed commandos to create tracks suggesting two different species in the same area, further confusing trackers. One particularly devious tactic was to use reindeer overshoes approaching a target, switch to bear overshoes at the site to scare away patrols, then switch back to reindeer for the retreat. German trackers would find 3 different trail types and assume random wildlife, never connecting them to a single team. By 1942, the overshoes were standard issue for cold weather operations. The SOE produced over 2,000 pairs in various animal patterns. They were distributed to Norwegian commandos, British special forces, and even Soviet partisans operating behind German lines in Arctic regions. The Germans captured some pairs, but counterintelligence reports show they assumed the overshoes were improvised by individual resistance members, not standardized British equipment. That misconception kept the program secret throughout the war. Little did the Germans know, they were tracking ghosts wearing animal feet. The overshoes' most famous deployment came during Operation Gunnerside, the February 1943 raid on the Vemork heavy water plant in Norway. The facility produced deuterium oxide, critical for Nazi atomic research. British intelligence knew that destroying Vemork could cripple Hitler's nuclear program, but the plant sat in a remote valley surrounded by snow-covered mountains, crawling with German patrols. 6 Norwegian commandos parachuted into the wilderness 40 kilometers from the target. They wore reindeer overshoes for the entire approach. For 3 days, they crossed open snowfields, climbed ice-covered ridges, and moved through areas under constant German observation. Behind them, their tracks looked like wandering reindeer, meandering paths with no apparent purpose. German patrols saw the tracks, examined them, radioed that wildlife was active in the sector, and moved on. The commandos reached Vemork, planted explosives, and destroyed the heavy water production chambers. The blast was heard for kilometers. German reinforcements rushed to the area within hours.
They found the saboteurs' exit route immediately, a clear trail heading northeast into the mountains. But the tracks were reindeer hooves. German commanders assumed the explosion had startled a herd, causing them to flee. Pursuit teams followed the tracks for 8 kilometers before giving up, convinced they were chasing animals. The commandos escaped to Sweden. The Overshoes went with them. In the aftermath, German intelligence analyzed the raid for months. They knew British commandos had infiltrated. They found evidence of military explosives, but they could never explain how the team approached the facility without leaving human tracks. Some reports suggested the British had trained actual reindeer to carry explosives, a theory taken seriously enough that German units began shooting reindeer on site in secure areas. The commandos' actual method remained undiscovered.
The Overshoes proved equally valuable for smaller operations. A resistance team in northern Norway used them to raid a German supply depot in January 1944. They approached using bear paw overshoes, betting that German sentries wouldn't follow bear tracks at night. The bet paid off. The guards saw massive paw prints in the perimeter snow, reported possible bear activity, and stayed inside their heated bunker. The resistance team walked through the front gate, stole ammunition and medical supplies, and left. The next morning, Germans found the bear tracks leading directly to the depot and away again. They assumed a bear had been scavenging garbage. The missing supplies were attributed to poor inventory tracking. No alarm was raised. British commandos used the Overshoes for escape and evasion as well. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Collins was shot down over Norway in 1943. He survived the crash, but landed in German-controlled territory. Norwegian resistance members provided him with reindeer overshoes. For 2 weeks, Collins walked 150 kilometers through enemy-patrolled wilderness towards Sweden. German trackers found his trail multiple times. Each time, they identified it as reindeer and abandoned pursuit. Collins reached neutral territory and was extracted back to Britain. He kept the Overshoes as a souvenir and later donated them to a museum with a note, "These rubber hooves saved my life by making the Germans think I was lunch instead of a pilot." The psychological impact on German forces was corrosive. Reports from Norwegian occupation units show increasing paranoia about wildlife. Soldiers began seeing threats in every animal track, convinced that resistance fighters were using some form of camouflage they couldn't detect. Some units instituted policies requiring double-checking any reindeer tracks found near sensitive facilities. This wasted enormous amounts of time. Reindeer tracks were everywhere, and German soldiers spent hours investigating wildlife while actual threats slipped past using the same animal prints they'd just dismissed as harmless. Not every mission succeeded. In 1944, a British team using the Overshoes was compromised when one commando fell and injured his ankle. He couldn't maintain the careful gait required for convincing tracks. The Overshoes began leaving drag marks and unnatural patterns. A German tracker noticed the inconsistency and realized the tracks were fake. The team was ambushed. 2 commandos died in the firefight. The survivors ditched the Overshoes and escaped through a river, using water to eliminate all tracks. German intelligence recovered the Overshoes and sent them to Berlin for analysis, but by then, the war was nearly over. The program's full scope remained hidden. Soviet partisans who received the Overshoes used them with brutal efficiency. One group in Karelia used bear paw prints to terrorize a German garrison. They'd approach the camp at night wearing the Overshoes, leave massive tracks circling the perimeter, and fire single shots before vanishing. The Germans assumed a bear was attracted to their food stores and becoming aggressive. After 2 weeks of bear attacks, the garrison abandoned the position, moving to an area they considered safer from wildlife. Soviet forces moved in immediately. The entire deception had been orchestrated by 4 partisans wearing rubber paws. By war's end, SOE estimated the Overshoes contributed to over 60 successful sabotage operations in Norway alone. That's infrastructure destroyed, intelligence gathered, and Nazi resources diverted, all because German trackers saw animal prints and walked away. The Overshoes didn't kill directly, but they killed German situational awareness.
They killed pursuit efforts. They killed the ability of occupation forces to distinguish between nature and infiltration. And that made them one of the most effective deception tools Britain ever deployed. What if I told you that rubber hooves sabotaged Hitler's atomic program while German guards followed fake reindeer in circles? The footprint overshoes revolutionized cold weather infiltration tactics. Before their introduction, commando operations in snow-covered terrain had a 70% compromise rate. Most teams were detected before completing objectives. After 1942, that rate dropped to 35% in operations where overshoes were used. German pursuit success rates collapsed from 55% to under 20%. The overshoes didn't just help commandos hide, they made German trackers actively dismiss real threats as environmental noise. But the limitations were significant. The overshoes only worked in snow or soft ground where they left clear impressions. On bare rock, frozen tundra, or hard-packed ice, they left no prints at all and became dead weight. Commandos had to carry them for kilometers through non-snow terrain just to use them for short snow crossings. Some teams ditched the overshoes after single uses rather than carry them further, leading to supply shortages.
The gait required for convincing tracks was exhausting. Walking carefully, deliberately placing each foot to mimic animal movement was slow and physically draining. A normal human walks at 4 to 5 kilometers per hour. Wearing overshoes correctly reduced that to 3 kilometers per hour. Over long distances, the speed penalty became a tactical liability. Teams using overshoes needed extra time for infiltration, which increased exposure to German patrols and reduced mission windows. Weather affected effectiveness drastically. In fresh, powdery snow, the overshoes created perfect impressions. But in wet, heavy snow, the prints looked too clean. Real animals dragged snow with their movements, creating messier tracks. In wind-blown snow, tracks filled in rapidly, which was an advantage for hiding trails, but also meant the overshoes provided no benefit, since even real footprints disappeared quickly. Commandos had to assess conditions constantly and decide whether the overshoes helped or hindered. The most dangerous limitation was overconfidence. Some teams relied so heavily on the overshoes that they became careless with other aspects of fieldcraft. One Norwegian resistance group used reindeer overshoes, but forgot to camouflage their equipment caches. German patrols found the supplies, realized humans had been in the area, backtracked to find the reindeer trail, and followed it to the resistance hideout. 8 fighters were captured. The overshoes had created perfect tracks, but surrounding mistakes gave away the deception. The technology was only as good as the operational security supporting it. Expert trackers occasionally identified the fakes. German mountain troops with extensive wildlife experience noticed that some reindeer tracks showed no variation in hoof spread. The rubber didn't flex like real keratin hooves. Some prints appeared too uniform, lacking the micro variations that occur when animals shift weight across uneven terrain. In a few documented cases, German trackers became suspicious and followed the tracks despite their animal appearance, leading to contact with British teams. But these instances were rare. Most German trackers never looked closely enough to notice the subtle inconsistencies. Manufacturing couldn't keep pace with demand. By 1944, commando units were requesting overshoes faster than the Scottish facility could produce them. Some teams shared pairs, passing them between missions. Others improvised, carving wooden blocks into hoof shapes and strapping them to boots. Crude substitutes that rarely fooled anyone, but were better than nothing. The supply shortage meant that overshoes were prioritized for high-value missions, leaving routine patrols without them. Despite these limitations, the overshoes' strategic value was immense. They forced Germany to divert resources into wildlife monitoring, a complete waste of military effort. German units in Norway spent hundreds of man-hours investigating animal tracks, establishing reindeer-free zones around facilities, and even culling wildlife populations to reduce track confusion. All of this because they never realized the animals they were tracking wore British boots underneath.
Post-war interrogations revealed German frustration. One Wehrmacht officer stationed in Norway said, "We knew the British were operating in our territory. We found sabotage, we found supplies, we found evidence of camps, but we never found their approach routes. The tracks would simply vanish into wildlife patterns. It was like fighting ghosts who left hoof prints." That's exactly what Britain wanted. Ghosts wearing rubber lies on their feet. The Overshoes proved that World War II wasn't just one with bombs and bullets. It was one with deception so subtle that the enemy saw the truth and dismissed it as nature. When the war ended, the Overshoes became legendary among Special Forces communities. Veterans shared stories. Training programs incorporated the lessons. But the technology didn't disappear. It evolved. During the Cold War, CIA operatives used updated versions in Afghanistan and Arctic regions. Modern materials replaced rubber, synthetic compounds that were lighter, more durable, and left even more convincing prints. The British Special Air Service continued using footprint deception techniques into the 1990s. SAS teams operating in the Falklands War used overshoes designed to mimic penguin tracks along coastal areas, a bizarre but effective update of World War II tactics. The principle remained unchanged. Make the enemy see what they expect to see, and they'll ignore what's actually there. Wildlife biologists studying animal populations in conflict zones sometimes discover anomalous tracks, perfect reindeer prints leading to places reindeer never go, bear tracks appearing in regions with no bear populations. Many of these are modern special forces using descendants of Britain's World War II overshoes. The technology is so effective that it remains classified in many nations. The basic designs are public knowledge now, but the advanced materials and construction techniques are still military secrets. Museums display original overshoes with reverence. The Imperial War Museum has a pair used during Operation Gunnerside, still showing the wear marks from that 3-day approach to Wehrmacht. Visitors often laugh when they first see them. Rubber hooves on a commando boot look absurd, but the placard explains, these overshoes helped destroy Nazi Germany's atomic program by making German trackers think they were following reindeer. The laughter stops. The genius becomes clear. The overshoes' greatest legacy is conceptual. They proved that deception doesn't have to be complex. Sometimes the best lies are the simplest. Don't hide your tracks, transform them. Don't avoid detection, redirect it toward false conclusions. Make the enemy's expertise work against them by feeding them data that confirms their expectations. German trackers were trained to identify animal tracks. The overshoes gave them exactly what they were trained to recognize, and that made those trackers useless. The footprint overshoes never fired a shot, never exploded, never drew blood, but they killed German operational effectiveness by turning their own trackers into liabilities. Every commando team that infiltrated undetected using animal prints was a mission the Germans couldn't prevent. Every sabotage operation guided by rubber hooves was infrastructure destroyed. Every resistance fighter who escaped by leaving reindeer tracks was a continued threat to Nazi occupation. The overshoes remind us that war's deadliest weapons often look ridiculous at first glance. Rubber animal feet strapped to military boots sound like a comedy sketch, but in practice, they were devastatingly effective. They sabotaged atomic facilities. They guided raids deep into occupied territory. They saved lives by making pursuers follow fake trails into nowhere. And they did it all by exploiting a fundamental truth. People see what they expect to see, and they dismiss everything else as noise. The commandos who wore these strange overshoes through Norwegian winters understood something profound. Invisibility isn't about being unseen, it's about being misidentified. The Germans saw the tracks, they examined them, they followed them, and they concluded reindeer, bears, birds, not threats, not humans, not enemies. That misidentification, that failure to recognize the truth literally printed in the snow before their eyes, cost Germany dearly. So the next time you see animal tracks in snow, remember the British commandos who left hoofprints where boots should have been. Remember the rubber lies that guided men through hostile territory. Remember the weird, wonderful, utterly brilliant overshoes that turned soldiers into ghosts wearing wildlife on their feet. That's the genius of British World War II innovation. That's the weapon that erased tracks by making them perfectly, convincingly wrong. From lipstick guns to pencil daggers to concealed blades, World War II weapons reveals how British intelligence turned innocence into lethality. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of weapons that killed through perfect disguise and brilliant deception.